G'day, this is Trent Klarenbach with the Trent Klarenbach podcast, brought to you by the Klarenbach Grain Report and the Klarenbach Special Crops Report. Well, I'm excited about today's guest. It's Stuart Lawrence from Rosetown, Saskatchewan. I've known Stuart for, 30 years probably. And Stuart is very active in the farm community, serves his community well. He's on the local municipality. He's serving at the provincial level on different crop and commodity boards, which I'll get Stuart to tell us more about that later. But I'm looking forward to the conversation, Stuart.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Trent.
Yeah, it's been a while. So
Yeah.
trying to think back. I always like to think back to when we first met. And was it university or was it?
No, it was after university, and I think we had a mutual friend, David Nobbs, and I think he introduced us. And the first time I remember us really being around each other a lot was we took a class in Rosetown on futures trading.
Yeah.
And I think that was about the first time that we really started to hang around together. And after that, I mean, we were both young farmers at the time. And I remember, emailing back and forth. There was no texting at this point in time.
Yeah.
I mean, email, I think we all had sastel.net email addresses, and email was really new. And I remember us emailing spreadsheets back and forth, and like I had built a trucking cost calculator, and I remember you had built one that was on test weight in Durham.
Oh, yeah.
And we were trying to, it was a thought experiment. We were trying to increase test weight in Durham so we can make more money, because we sell in mass, not in volume, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the first time I remember us really being involved together was that time when we were farming.
Well, that marketing class, you or your father organized it. Maybe you both did, right?
Yeah, I think.
Was there like three of us in it, or?
Yeah, I can't remember how many we got, and I can't even remember the company that we got to teach it.
Keystone Marketing, I think.
That's what it was, Keystone. Yeah, I couldn't remember who it was. I was thinking about that on the way in. And
I reference that course a lot to
Yeah.
a lot of people. It was Darrell Vargine or I think that's how I pronounce his name. He was
Yeah.
one of the presenters.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
I remember him telling us, he said, I don't know why you guys store your grain.
Yeah.
Because why not just sell it at harvest time and speculate on paper?
That's right.
And that
Yeah.
always stuck with me. We didn't have the opportunities with the crops I was growing
Yeah.
to really do much of that or any of that, but nonetheless, that's stuck
Yeah.
with me today.
Yeah, that was extremely formative for me because, you have to think back to, the time that we were doing this. And that was, I guess probably, I won't say like the last throws of Canadian Wheat Board because that was like 2012, but, this was a decade earlier.
Yeah.
Actually, no, it was 2 decades earlier.
Yeah.
And, we were young farmers struggling, trying to make money and trying to get cash flow. And that was one of the things that we battled so hard back then was, to start out, you had to get a mortgage. Well, if you had to pay your mortgage, the banks want their semi-annual payments, and the Wheat Board didn't care about your cash flow needs. And so it's like, woo, we got a 3 bushel quota on Durham. Well, that's not enough. And, so we're growing pulse crops, and the struggle I had with pulse crops is you would deliver, but you wouldn't get paid for a month.
Right.
And so it was interesting times back then for 2 young farmers trying to make money. And so, that was the genesis of that course, right? Trying to, to use paper to offset risk.
Yeah.
I didn't have much success like you did.
No, I didn't really apply it. I had no money to speculate with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't, so I didn't really get any experience with it until quite 20 years later. Right?
Yeah.
But, it was, like that's how so desperate we were to try to break even or generate a profit. We're trying to figure out how to get another 5%.
I know,
on our bushel weight.
I remember signing up for the Warburton program under the Wheat Board, and you had to grow a certain wheat variety, but you got $10 a ton extra.
Right.
So you got a premium. And I mean, I also remember, where my trucking cost calculator came from was at the time elevator companies were trying to attract business but they were paying farmers for trucking. So, I was, well, should I deliver local or should I go to Swift Current? Should I go to Moose Jaw? Like, sure, it's great. An elevator in one town might offer you $5 and another one might offer you 10. But was I losing money by going the extra distance to get $10? And so it kind of became this thing of, well, what were my cash costs of trucking? What was my depreciation costs? And if I was in a pinch, as long as they were more than covering my cash costs, then it was like, in theory, if I made a penny by trucking it all the way to some other town, well, I guess I made money, right? And it was down to that kind of level of granularity that we're trying to use Excel spreadsheets to figure out whether $5 a ton here, $10 a ton there made us money. And I don't think young farmers of today can really quite appreciate that. I mean, I don't want to get into a generation war, but I mean, I'm glad that we're farming in different times now than what we were then.
It was extremely painful.
Yeah.
So on that point, and it would have been at that same time, I went and found the elevator rates for elevators from western Saskatchewan to southern Alberta.
Yeah.
I think Empress, Saskatchewan and Mossley, Alberta stand out as being low freight rates at that time. And trying to figure out, it didn't make any sense. But I mean, those calculations you try to run, can I get another 20 cents a bushel or whatever?
I know.
Just desperation, right?
Yeah. I mean, we still, that information is kind of there in the basis, but I mean, it's generally speaking, I mean, in some respects, it's a little bit harder to tease that out of the price now than it was then. I mean, you could literally go online. And again, your 56K modems or whatever, it took a long time to get the information, but you could go online, you could find out what the freight rate was in Kindersley or Rosetown or, wherever along whatever branch line. And I know I was comparing, well, should I go north to Bigger to the CN main line? Should I go south to Swift Current to the CP main line, right? And so I still use my trucking cost calculator, except it's on version 50. And I've just continued to tweak it over the years. And I still use that today. But that was something that I came up with back in the 90s to try and figure out how to try and eke another $5.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, so it's interesting times. I'm glad that those days are done now. I appreciate the market that we're in now.
Yeah, absolutely, right.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to, I mean, it's still difficult. Don't get me wrong. I mean, farming is a hard business, but it's easier. You have more options now to get cash flow than you did back then. And that was, the thing I always said about growing canola is that I'd climb up to the top of a bin, late June and look around, and you might see 5 fields out in the countryside. 3 of them are going to be my canola, and 2 of them would be someone's wild mustard wreck in their lentils, right?
Yeah.
But, I started growing canola, when it wasn't really adapted to our area yet, but it became a cash flow tool. I mean, if I needed to, I might have to suck on a 40-under basis, but at least I could get some cash flow and I could avoid that call to the banker and say, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to get paid for my lentils for another week.
Yeah.
It's a different environment now. And I think we've got more tools now to manage cash flow. So I guess in that sense, it's slightly easier.
Yeah. Well, I remember trying to growing hollis and barley, triticale, fig, barley. My neighbors would say, well, can you make any money on this? Well, I don't think I'm going to make any money on this particular crop. Why you're growing? I said, because I need cash.
Yeah.
I need something needs to generate some cash flow.
Yeah.
And that was just the wheat forward was a real inhibitor too.
I remember the whole thing over waxy barley. I mean, they didn't want, they just wanted a, uniform commodity, in the wheat board area, right? They didn't want to deal with this niche stuff and not even to get in, deep into the weeds about the wheat board using durum or other pools to subsidize wheat in Durham and stuff like that. But it was just a different environment that they just didn't want anyone to try and go outside the norm. They had this little box that they wanted everyone to play in. And, you know, at the time, if you were 60 years old and didn't have a mortgage, yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah, yeah.
But, you know, trying to buy your dad out, well, it's a little bit harder. Or trying to buy the neighbor out, trying to grow your business and be, you know, in your 20s or 30s. It's kind of a brutal time to, you know. And the funny thing is that our generation, I think we had probably, again, not to get into a generation war, but I'm just thinking back, it's like we all went to U of S, right? Like we left high school, we went to the U of S, we didn't leave high school and, oh yeah, now we're a farmer.
Right, right.
You know,
Wasn't
so
not really an option for me. It was
yeah,
go to school.
yeah. I kind of did the circular route to the U of S because, you know, I when I was in high school, I loved to fix farm equipment. And so I decided I was going to be a ag tech.
Right.
And so when I graduated high school in 87, then I went off to Kelsey, SciEst campus. They call it Polytech now. But so I went there to become a mechanic. And I came out of there after 2 years and I was a second level apprentice. And I worked in New Holland dealership and then moved over to a John Deere dealership and got my way up to third level apprentice. And then one day I was kind of at the parts washer getting Varsol and cuts in my hands, and hands are stinging. And
There's carcinogenic.
yeah, you know, and I looked down my hands and, you know, like they were mostly numb and the other parts that weren't numb were burning. And I'm like, this is dumb. You know, I don't want to do this. I don't want to fix other people's broken junk. I want to break my own.
Yeah, yeah.
And so at the time I had a roommate and I don't know if anyone tripped down memory lane, but if anyone remembers the movie Cocktail with Tom Cruise.
Oh yes, yeah, yeah.
And he was a bartender and he always had that self-help manual underneath the bar. And my roommate at the time, no joke, he was that guy.
Really?
Yeah, Mike.
Self-help man.
Mike had the self-help book, and
Really?
we worked together, and he always told me that, you know, this was dumb. I didn't want to do this for a living, or he didn't want to do this for a living, and so he decided that he was gonna go off and get a business degree, and
Really?
I'm like inspired by that, and I'm kind of like, yeah, you know what? I'm gonna go to the U.S. I'm gonna take ag, and so I packed up my toolbox and loaded it up and headed out. And I worked for Dad that summer. And then in the fall, I went to U of S. I did School of Ag, Voc Ag, because I wanted to be on the farm for seeding and harvest. So at the time, School of Ag had a shorter school year, so that worked out well. So I did that for 3 years, and yeah, and then started farming. And you know, it's interesting, when I bought my land, looking at your chart of Saskatchewan land values, I mean, it should have been like easy money,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
Like
yeah.
you look at that chart,
Yeah, yeah.
and the land was cheap,
Yeah.
right? And
Relatively cheap. Yeah.
a year after university, you know, there was a ad in the local newspaper, and remember, that's how you used to buy land, right? There was an ad in the Rosetown Eagle or the El Rosa Review, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, so I answered an ad and ended up with my first half section, and then a couple 3 years later, I got the gumption up and I drove up the road one day and I asked the neighbors, like, have you guys thought about retirement? What's retirement look like for you guys? And you know, and a cup of coffee later, I had 6 quarters
Oh, really?
on a handshake, right? And just said, we gotta, you know, I'll go get the lawyers to draw it up and I'll get the financing. And now, you know, here I am. I'm 2 or 3 years after university and I've got 8 quarters of farmland and everything is rolling, right?
Yeah.
And
Okay, so eight quarters and things
Yeah.
are rolling.
yeah, things are rolling. I think that's about, trying to remember when that was, about 98, 99, somewhere's in there. Yeah.
Things are just starting to turn around. They're like 96. I think things kind of
Yeah.
started coming around again.
We had the confluence of drought and low commodity prices.
Yes.
And I'd purchased my land and we had, oh gosh, trying to remember, like 1996 was an extremely wet year. It was like 2016 was. We had like 30 inches of rain or something like that. And so, of course, like the lentils sucked and everything like that, but durum was good. And I remember my dad's, we're combining durum one day, and he says, take a good look around because you may never see another durum crop like this. And it was 80 bushels to the acre.
Wow.
And Dad was absolutely flabbergasted. Like it was a good thing that our lentils were garbage because we had bin space for durum. And the quality wasn't great, but we had lots of bushels. And then, 97, things were pretty good because you had a lot of stored water left over from 96. And I remember that 97 was a bit of an odd year. It was the opposite of this year, where there was rain in May and June.
Yeah.
And then kind of like the end of June, early July, the tap turned off. So I guess probably more like last year was, like 2024 was, where it was wet early and then the tap turned off. And then 1998 was like this year, where it was dry up front and then the tap turned on in July. And we ended up, so we had 80 bushel durum in 96, and then 97 and 98 we had 40 bushel durum. And Dad was an early adopter of zero till, right? Like he started zero till in 83.
Oh, wow.
And so I said, Dad, with this zero till, I think we've got drought licked. And famous last words. I wish I'd have never, ever said that, because I felt good about, what we were able to do with our production abilities. And I don't think, as I remember, like the markets weren't great, but they weren't puke worthy either. And then, so that's, I had a half section. I go out and I acquire the neighbors. I get 6 more quarters, and land was affordable. I mean, at the time, like I didn't even blink twice. Like when they asked their price, I just said, yeah, I can make that work. And off I went, right? And then,
What were your production costs back then?
oh, wow, I don't remember.
It would have been like $160 an acre.
Oh, no. I mean, I remember walking into the fertilizer retail, and I said that, I really want to, I think we can improve our fertility program. I think we're leaving some yield on the table. And they said, okay, well, what's your fertilizer budget? And I said, $50. And their jaws literally hit the counter.
Yeah.
Like my dad, he thought he was doing something if he put 40 pounds of N and 25 pounds of P down.
Yeah.
And so, I wanted to start building fertility. We're pretty big in the Sask Soil Conservation Association at the time. And we had just started. So Dad was an early adopter of zero till, and I was an early adopter of precision ag. And so I don't remember what our total crop budgets were, but, just to guess, I don't know what the cap costs were, but you were probably putting, variable costs were under $50 an acre.
Yeah.
And of course, equipment back in the day was super cheap, right? So you look at all these things and go, well, how could they not make money, right? You're looking back on it, you look at charts, like, how could they not make money? And then, well, the great equalizer in that was the wheat board.
Yeah. And drought.
And drought, right? And that's when I started farming, and 99 was the last kind of good year for me back then. And then drought started.
Yeah.
And I remember like Halloween, how everyone says, well, I hope the kids, don't have to wear their snowsuits over top of their costume, right? That it's going to be cold. Yeah. Well, Halloween in 98, we had 2 inches of rain. And then in 99, we had 3.5 inches of rain, and again, another 40 bushel durum crop. And I thought, wow, this is good. And I was feeling just good enough about life that I was covering mortgage payments. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go and get a new F-150. And yeah, it was that was the beginning of the end, I suppose. It just kind of tailed off from there. I don't remember exactly what year it was, but talking about barley earlier, and I had signed up on a production contract to grow Stein barley with
Oh,
UGG.
yeah, yeah.
And I don't remember exactly all the details of it, but if I remember right, if it was malt, it had to go to them, and if it went feed, then you could go anywhere with it. And I grew 107 bushels to the acre of Stein barley and lost money. And it was because it didn't go malt. So, and that was back then. You got to kind of appreciate how the feed barley prices were, like the board was selling or buying feed barley as well as malt, right? So they had a price of feed barley was always half of what malt was. And so Lethbridge, they had no incentive to pay more,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
So
like just for example, what was do you remember those? I can't think those feed barley prices back then. I grew Stein one year too. It was
I remember it well. It was
like,
96 bucks a ton,
yeah,
$2 a
$2 a
bushel.
bushel. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't remember where I ended up selling it, but I remember doing the research like you. I was phoning around everywhere and trying to find a buyer for it. And delivered Lethbridge was 96 bucks a ton. It was 31 bucks a ton to get it there.
Like $1.50 a bushel. Yeah, I remember though. I
Yeah.
that's why I was asking because I couldn't quite remember all these values, but they were.
Yeah, that one stuck out for me.
Yeah.
I remember that one.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you lose money on 107 bushel to the acre? Yep. But that's, right around then, I was big into growing canola. I was growing lentils. Just a year. Well, no, we were, at that point in time, we were dabbling in the chickpeas. And that's kind of, I think, how you and I sort of ended up running in the same circles was through David Nobbs, because we all started growing kabulis at the same time.
Yeah.
And
96, 97 in there.
yeah, I was, I think, a couple of years behind you guys. My last crop of kabulis at the time was 2002. And in the 2002 drought, like our combine never left the shed. The crop was written off in July. And so I ended up, I think I sold my kabuli chickpeas to a local cowboy. And he had another guy come and swath them, and then the cowboy come and baled them, and then he never paid either one of us. But the only thing green in the countryside was kabuli chickpeas, and there was absolutely there was no chickpeas there because mice were coming up and they were crawling up the plants, and they would bite the petiole off, and the pod would fall on the ground. And all these pods are on the ground, and the crop insurance adjuster wouldn't believe us that it was a combination of drought and mouse damage.
Yeah, it was. I had canary seed with my
Yep.
mouse damage and canary, like wiped out a crop pretty much.
Yeah, we were standing there, and we're on the dividing line between a canary crop and a kabuli crop side by side on my land, and basically the adjuster was like calling BS that there was mouse damage. And just as we're standing there, a mouse crawled up a canary seed plant and then bit the head off. The head fell to the ground. The mouse dropped down and then ate the head. The adjuster looks around and goes, "Oh."
I probably missed an opportunity there.
Yeah.
Canary seed crop of mine, I couldn't prove it was mice.
Yeah. And you know what? They wouldn't have believed it if it hadn't happened in front of their eyes.
Yeah.
And
Just for reference to people to understand this, how it can actually happen. I had a canary seed crop. It was green, had a rotary combine, it's tough to thrash.
yeah.
And other stuff to do. I kept coming back to it. It wasn't ever ready. I came back to it once, and the heads were all white.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What happened? And there's a mouse infestation that year. Remember, it would be November going to hockey. It'd be mice running across the road all year round. Like, it was nuts.
Yeah, it reminded me of the mice plagues in Australia. Like there was, Highway 4 south of Rosetown, there was 4 strips on the highway of dead mice. And mice would be running across the highway and cars would run over them. And after the crops are off, then of course they're out of feed and nothing left to eat. So what was happening is they were going up on one would go on the road, it would get crushed. and another one come along and they're cannibalizing that one, and then they get run over. They got into our farmhouse and absolutely just, I found out you can't put an insurance claim in a house, but an RV you can. Yeah, that doesn't quite make sense to me, but yeah, whatever. So yeah, they got into our farmhouse, something fierce, and it was bad. And yeah, so we struggled with drought really hard. And then,
Do you have grasshopper issues?
oh yeah,
So you had drought.
yeah,
You had
yeah,
like a locust.
yeah,
Might be a hyperbole, but maybe not by much.
not by much.
And
Yeah,
plague of mice.
mice. Yeah, it was funny. In like I said, the crop insurance wrote off our crop in July of 2002, and we had the adjuster out. They come out like 10 o'clock, and we're driving across Dad's farmland and my farmland, and the adjuster's truck started to overheat, and so we decided to stop for lunch. The adjuster came into the house, and Mom fed everybody lunch, and while they were finishing up, of course, like I'm a mechanic, right? So I went out and had a look at their Dodge truck, and the radiator was right full of grasshoppers.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, they were in the house having dessert, and I was out in the shop, and I was pulling the radiator out of the crop insurance adjuster's truck and cleaning all the grasshoppers out of it. And once I was done buttoning that up, the adjuster says, "Yeah, I think I've seen enough here." Signed all the paperwork, wrote everything off, and we were done for the year in July.
Wow.
And in that time frame, 2002 was actually the most money that I made because I had no harvest expenses.
Yeah.
I had no fuel, no repairs.
I had a disc opener, Dutch Industries disc opener with poor packing ability.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't germinate off the hop, and it got a rain. I couldn't get acres written off, and that was
Ugh.
well, whatever that cost would be. That would give me a profit, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way it was for us.
Yeah.
We ended up, less interest costs because we got to pay all our bills as soon as we got our check.
Yeah.
And yeah, no harvest expenses, no breakdowns, no fuel.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, 2003, it was just good enough to have to go combine and lose money.
Was 4 a bad year too? 4 was horrible for us.
4 was frost. But in 2003, in the winter, 2002, I got married. In 2003, my wife's pregnant and our son's due in January of 2004. And I'm like, man, this is not going so well. Like I'm not making any money farming. And so I had kind of just started a side hustle. I made my first yield map in '96. In the first handful of years, I was using the case dealership to get precision ag products through. And they were all case branded Trimble and Ag Leader products.
Gee, that was very rudimentary back then.
Yeah, it was pretty early stuff. And then we lost our case dealership in Rosetown in 2000. So I kind of battled for a few years and like your GPS stuff will work for, a few years without updates or whatever and needing parts. And then it kind of got to a point where it's like, yeah, you know what? I need stuff and parts. So I signed up to be a Trimble reseller and I had a few people bringing me Ag Leader yield monitors and sprayer controllers and stuff. And they had a issue with backup batteries inside. So I'm changing the batteries, but yeah, it's not like today where you just go on Amazon and, I need this battery, right?
Oh,
no,
yeah.
like you had to get it from the manufacturer. And so I phoned down there and I got told by their tech support guy, like, this is the third time I've talked to you this week. If you're going to be fixing our stuff, you got to be a dealer.
Oh, really?
So I ended up,
So you became a dealer.
yeah, so I became an Ag Leader dealer. So I was selling Trimble guidance and steering products and then Ag Leader, precision controls, yield monitors, stuff like that. And that was, I've been doing it a couple of years, but I wasn't it wasn't a going enough concern that I could make money, couldn't make a living at it. And I'm like really super nervous about, what's going to go on here in terms of cash, because now I got a family coming. And then it was right around that time that my banker phoned me, called me in and had a come to Jesus meeting. And it was like, yeah, you know what? I'm done. Like I'm done with this.
What year would that have been?
It was late fall 2003.
Okay.
And I wasn't like, he didn't pull the pin. It was just like, after I walked out of that meeting, I'm just like, I'm done. Like I had something snapped. I was over it. I couldn't fight the fight anymore. And whether it was, cash flow issues or drought or everything all at once, it just all combined. And I'm like, that's it. And so I put up my 8 quarters for land in the Rosetown Eagle and the Kindersley Clarion and ended up selling all my land, and I decided to walk away, and I licked my wounds and decided to focus 100% on my side hustle, became my main hustle. And I left Rosetown, and the only money that I made in 5 years of farming was when I sold the land. I kept the house that I bought from the neighbors. And so I put that in the Western Producer, and I got $25,000 for the house. So when the dust settled after 5 years of farming, I had $25,000.
And that's like, people, if they started farming after that period of time,
Yeah.
I hear the comments, well, they were so smart,
Yeah.
why did they keep farming? Well,
Yeah.
it was a different time.
It was a different time.
Different time back then. And if you
Yeah.
don't have some deep pockets backing you, or like, what do you do?
I know.
Different time. 5 years and
Yeah.
you made money off the house.
Yep. Sold an asset, and that's the money I made. So I put that down on a house. My wife had a job in Wilkie, and so she was a school teacher. So I used my profits from 5 years of farming to down payment on a house.
And did you move to Wilkie then? Is that where you
Yep.
went
I
to?
moved to Wilkie and I ran my business out of there. So I still came back and I helped Dad. And, I think I grounded out for about, I don't know, maybe about 5 years. That's just, selling and servicing precision ag products. And and then one day my rep at Ag Leader said, we're looking for a territory manager. Are you interested? My boss wants to know if you're interested. And I'm like, okay. So I ended up going down to Iowa and doing a job interview. And
Take old Blue down to Iowa?
no, I didn't. That happened a couple years later.
Yeah.
Actually, well, and then maybe about a year later. But yeah, I did. So yeah, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna take the company job, and that seemed pretty appealing at the time. Regular paycheck.
Absolutely.
Health and benefits, all the stuff, right? So yeah, I did that, and yeah, you mentioned Old Blue, and most folks might not know, but my social media handle is Old Blue 81, and like 15, 20 years ago, whenever social media started, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was cool. You didn't use your name; you had a handle,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And so I'm like, I don't know if I want anyone to know my real name on the internet, because Google's the devil or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't sure whether I wanted that, so I'm like, yeah, okay. Old Blue 81 became my handle, and that's the truck I had in high school. Was a Blue 81 GMC, and I still have it today. And then on January 9th, coming up on January 9th, I'll have had it for 40 years.
Oh, wow.
So it's my project toy, whatever. In 2009, I don't know if you remember, like Monster Garage and all the Discovery TV automotive shows, like, oh, we're going to lose the shop, all that stuff, right? And I had some business meetings in first week of October in Iowa. And I'm like, I haven't driven the truck in like, I don't know what it was, 6 years or something like that. And it's like, yeah, I'm going to take the old truck down to Iowa. And I was helping Dad at the time, and we had wrapped up harvest except for 1/4 of canary seed. It was too green to combine yet. So yeah, like I serviced the truck, all the basic maintenance or whatever. And then, yeah, we hopped in the truck one day and yeah, we just headed off he tagged along with me and took 2 days to get down to Iowa. And I had 3 days of meetings, and then we come back 2 days. And then by that time it had froze. The canary seed was ready to go. So yeah, we went and combined canary seed after that. But I was somewheres around Outlook, and it kind of hit me like, what are you doing? You're driving this crappy old truck, and you're going to go 1,300 miles to Iowa, but it seemed like an adventure at the time.
Oh, absolutely.
And yeah, you know what? It's a core memory for me. Dad and I, spending. He just kind of bummed around Ames, Iowa for a couple of days while I had my meetings, and then would come out and hang out with us for supper and a couple of drinks afterwards, and it was a great time to spend that week with my dad. I loved it. And I guess to flash forward to last year, Dad had finished his radiation treatments for cancer, prostate cancer, and so he was like, you know what? When we went down to Iowa, I never got a chance to see anyone combining corn. And,
oh, really?
Yeah, and so yeah, we decided, you know what? Yeah, let's go do that. And we were going to take my old 81 again, and then yeah, I mean, like this was, oh goodness, it would have been in like September, and that truck doesn't have air conditioning. And I kind of thought, well, Dad, he's still recovering from his radiation treatments. At the time he was sleeping a lot, so I kind of thought, yeah, you can't recline in that truck. So, okay, so we'll take a new one. So yeah, we hopped into his newer truck and recreated the trip and went all the way down to Iowa, and we watched or stopped and saw some museums and stuff on the way, and yeah, Dad got to ride around in a combine and doing like literally 300 bushel corn.
Really?
Yeah.
And you just found some rando down there, or how?
No, so over the years, I still, I left Ag Leader in 2015 to come back to manage Dad's farm for him, and he wanted to retire. And so I still had, over the years, had kept in touch with several of the guys I worked with. And one of the guys that I've still kept in touch with quite frequently, I think we text every day, probably about 50 times a day.
To this day?
To this day.
Really?
Yeah, I have a group of 9, I think, no, it'd be 8. I'm the 9th. Guys that we all worked there at the time. And we call it our cheers group. And it's as random as, at the end of the day, you might be sitting down and you might crack a beer and you take a photo of it and you send it to your group and say, cheers, guys. And yeah, and during COVID, we did Zoom calls. And so, yeah, we'd get together. We'd all have, and at this point in time now, like you got to kind of appreciate these are territory managers for a national company, international company. And most of us were spread out across Canada and the United States. I guess I'm the only Canadian, but so we started doing these Zoom calls and yeah, so we'd grab a cigar and our favorite beverage, and we'd just pit in on Zoom and awesome. Talk about pandemic and all the BS that goes around that, and what's new with everyone, and it's kind of tapered off a little bit, but we're still down to sending funny memes and
nice.
And then yeah, cheers, guys. And yeah, so I keep in touch, and I just got a hold of one of the guys that's still at Ag Leader, and I said, hey, yeah, remember remember when I went down for the job interview in '08, I rode around with your cousin combining corn. Is he still combining by any chance? And he's like, yeah. We're like, I want to bring Dad down. So it was funny then because yeah, his cousin Jim, he had, at the time, it was 240 bushel corn we were combining. And then last year it was 300 bushel.
So for a reference, at 240, was it like an average crop? As the yields increased,
Yeah.
like can you expect yields to increase that much? And
Yeah, I would
20,
say.
25%?
I think their genetic gain on corn is, don't quote me on this, but it's like 2 to 3% a year. Like just selecting the right hybrid.
Just that much research into it.
Yeah. It's in that ballpark. It's nuts. Like,
2 to 3, wow.
it was funny because his cousin Jim was telling me in 2008 that that was the first year that he had ever sold corn, because they always just backgrounded calves, right?
Oh yeah.
And so they grew corn to feed calves to sell beef. And he walked into the elevator and said, like, their yields had come up so much. They hadn't increased land or anything like that, but their yields had got to the point where, they couldn't add any more to the cattle herd. They were kind of limited on land base. They couldn't feed any more animals, but the genetic gain in corn, they got to a point where they had excess corn.
Is that right?
And so he's like, he walks into the elevator and I need to sell corn. How do you do that? Like, they looked at him like he was from Mars, but he had literally never sold a bushel of corn because
An Iowa
Yeah.
corn farmer.
yeah, because all he did was he just fed cows. And
That's neat.
yeah, so Jim ended up starting to sell corn, and now they've gone from 240 bushel, maybe not like an average, but the field that I was in was 240. The field that Dad was in was 300, right? So maybe they got better land here, worse land there, but that's the yields that we saw at the time. And it was pretty wild to see. Like, to go through a low spot that had drowned out and the yield monitor says 0, and then the very first number that you see on the yield monitor coming out of that is 90. And then you look back and just watch this fountain of corn coming in. It's just absolutely fantastic to watch.
Keeping it away from the combine.
It's nuts watching them. It is crazy.
What do you think the yield increase has been from the time you started farming to now?
Wow. Yeah. You know what? We used to say a bumper crop of durum was 40. Now you would lose all the dollars if you grew 40 bushel durum, right? So is some of it genetic gain? Sure. But it's nothing like we, have seen in corn. Like, I think our genetic gain might be like 0.25% a year, if that.
So
But I
that's
think it's
one thing
agronomy.
Agronomy is huge.
Yeah.
But I remember a few years ago, and I hadn't been on a combine in a while. I don't know if it was wheat or durum, doesn't even matter at this point. But it was a low stand by my
Yeah.
experience.
You would have been used to like Kyle Durham, right?
Yeah.
Which would grow 5 foot tall and fall over.
Yeah, fall over. Anyways, I'm in the combine looking at the yield monitor. What the hell's going on here? Like,
Yeah.
this is a 30 bushel crop.
Yeah.
But no, it was like 70 or 80.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah.
So what? So the agronomy is huge because obviously movement to air drills, and then
Yeah.
profitability allows you to do more. I want to say 50%. You think that's the yield increase?
Yeah, I bet you're probably in the ballpark. I mean, right off the top of my head, yeah, I remember a lot of things, but my head's usually pretty full and there's a lot of stuff I forget. I wouldn't know what my 5-year average, I mean, you can't look at, you got to throw 21, 22, 23 out. But I remember before the 21 drought, our 10-year crop insurance average on durum, I want to say was 52 bushels an acre.
Okay.
And
I don't Camfell?
no, that we're continuous crop.
Really? They got that high?
Yeah, so
Something like that.
it's so you're going to have years where it's 30, but then you're going to have a year where it's 72, right? And it averages all out at 52. So, like going into the 21 drought, our our canola average was north of 52, right? It was really good. We were like 50 as well, not 52. But, our canola average was good. I think lentil average was, north of 30, 32, somewheres in there. But yeah, like the 21 drought, 22 drought, 23 drought, you factor those in, and yeah, your averages come down pretty quick. So I don't know. Like, I mean, I know that there's genetic gain. I know that given the right moisture, we can do a lot more, even with the same genetics. Like,
Yes. Yeah.
I'm sure that if I could find some Kyle Durham seed, on the right year, I could probably get within a handful of bushels of the latest genetics, right? But it's going to fall over and you'll be scraping it off the ground, and, it's going to have all the issues that Kyle Durham
Yeah.
used to have, right? It's going to have wonderful color, but, like that's, yeah, there's lots of advantages to the newer genetics. And I think with modern agronomy, you can really get things to really pop. So, I mean, that's the fun thing for me. One of the things to go back to my time at the U of S, I'm full of very strongly held controversial opinions.
Are you? Well, this is a place to share them.
Yeah, and so my time at the U of S, I come to love agronomy, and I became firm in the belief that without agronomics, there can be no economics. And a crop production show, went out for supper with some guys, and quite a bit larger farmer than me. We're sitting together at restaurant in Saskatchewan over a steak and a glass of wine, and he's like, absolutely, without a word of a lie, logistics is greater than agronomy. And I'm like, nope.
Logistics. What do you mean
Like,
by logistics?
he means like asset utilization, so maximizing the amount of acres that you can put through a certain piece of equipment.
Yeah.
Keeping your drill full and going, and keeping grain away from your combines. All of that matters more than agronomy. And something that I learned at the U of S is that agronomy trumps all. And to me, if your agronomy is terrible, it doesn't matter how great you are at logistics or how great of a marketer you are.
Yeah.
You got to have bushels to sell. And so I'm very, like, I'm not a professional agronomist by trade. I only have a diploma in ag, but that is my thing that I do, is I work on my agronomy, my program, my system. And so I'm constantly trying to tweak that and improve that. I must have 500 notes in my phone. I've got 2 on the go right now where I'm already looking at we haven't even started combining yet.
Yeah.
And I'm already looking at what's going on in the fields, right now, and what I could do better for next year.
So are you monitoring in crop right now? Or
Yeah.
like from satellite or what?
Yeah. So, I have a subscription to a program, and I get whenever there's a bird over top, and whenever there's no cloud cover, you're going to get an NDVI image. And so I use those differently than I did when that technology first came out. I was trying to vary stuff based off of NDVI images, trying to create zones in fields. I've walked away from most of the principles that I have started with in precision ag. Now, for me, NDVI images show me where to put boots on the ground. And I go out and, if I see on a map, I got this giant red area, I got to go look at it. Right? That's telling me to go out and look. Do I have bugs? Do I have root rot? Have I got something going on?
So you might take tissue samples and stuff.
Yeah, I have done some tissue testing. I use that as a diagnostic tool. One year I was looking at some barley that was really beat up. It looked awful. And I was 100% convinced that I knew it wasn't frost, but like there was a lot of not just leaf tip necrosis, but like the whole leaves. And we're talking, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 leaf barley. And it was just yellow and looked like crap. And so I went out and I pulled a whole bunch of tissue tests thinking I am definitely deficient in some sort of nutrient on this. And then send it all in and the lab analyzes it. I don't know how many hundreds of dollars I spent on tissue tests. And it's like, oh, no, it's all good. I mean, there was a couple things, here and there. Nothing's ever perfect, right? But it was like, oh, no, I don't see anything out of the ordinary. And then I happened to be talking to an agronomist, and it's like, well, what'd you put in your burn off? Glyphosate, fluazalam. It's like frostazulam, you say. And it's it was herbicide carryover. It was residual being taken up into the barley, and then it looked like it had froze.
Oh, really?
But I knew it wasn't frost. That's why I pulled the tissue test.
Yeah. Interesting.
I don't do a whole lot of, like 10 years ago, what I used to do was, so I'd have my zones. I'd have 3 zones in a field. We'd go and pull soil cores from those 3 zones. We'd analyze them separately. So you'd have 3 soil tests per field. And then I would like to go out a couple of times during the growing season, and I would tissue test in the same spot that the soil cores were taken.
GPS them and everything.
Yeah. So everything was all GPSed, and so you go out and I'd tissue test, and what I was trying to do is to see, what nutrients are making it into the plant, because I know what I've got in my soil, but what's making it into the plant, right? And so I was looking at stuff like that, and I was putting a lot of effort and quite a few dollars into it, and I'm just, at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, okay, so basically what I'm learning is when I apply a nutrient, for the most part, it ends up in the plant. So I kind of backed off on that program, and I don't do that anymore. But there are some things that we can tweak. But I kind of decided, gosh, I don't know, it might have been 5, 6, 7 years ago, before the 21 drought. But I was always convinced that I needed to be on the other side of the bell curve when it came to my fertility. Like if I wanted a 40 bushel yield, I got to fertilize for 45. And so I was always a little bit heavy on the nutrients, and I had this notion that I was building soil.
Okay.
And I just kind of realized one day that my retailer's actually probably making more money than me. And so I kind of looked at it and said, I think I probably need to be like just before the top of the bell curve, not after. And so I kind of started to go, okay, I want to cut back, but how much to cut back? And so ended up writing in, or having, by this time I kind of turned over writing of prescriptions to a third party just to take one hat off my head. And so I told them, I want some 1 acre blocks in my prescriptions where we put 0 nitrogen down. And they go, what? And I'm like, well, no, I want to know what my nitrogen efficiency is. So I want to put like 0 nitrogen down, and then I want to compare it to the, right beside. I'll compare the acre right next door. I can compare it to acres all around it.
You put all the same, everything, all the other fertilizer down,
Yep.
except for.
So all we did is we basically did a 0 rate of nitrogen. The computer just, in the cab, just shut off the nitrogen for 1 acre.
Okay.
And then, it might be a little bit bigger, depending on, sections on the drill or whatever, but, about 1 acre. And then you would go through with a combine, and the yield monitor would pick it up. And then I'd just taken a process that I call like cookie cutter. You layer 2 pieces of data, and you just cookie cutter through the 2 layers. You go through the top one to see what's underneath. So you lay your application map on top, and then you look at your yield map underneath. Cookie cutter through, and I would look at my yield where I put 0 nitrogen down. And I could see these red squares on my NDVI images. You would walk out and you would look at the wheat, and it's like, oh, that's gross. You'd look at the canola, there's no branching. But I'll be damned if it didn't yield not bad. It's counterintuitive. In fact, there was once where I had durum 1 bushel better in that 1 acre than where I had applied nitrogen. And I also had it where canola was 1 bushel better than where I had applied nitrogen. And it kind of taught me that, you know what, I think that we're maybe discounting our soil's ability to mineralize nutrients. And it led me to now I'm kind of on this journey of not how much can I put down, it's how little I can put down. And so
basically law of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
You don't want to.
I don't want to over apply nutrients because number one, it costs me money. You know, and pretty much every fertilizer's got salt attached to the molecule, right? It is salt. That's why we have a salt index of fertilizers, right? So I've gone to, you know, like there's still, you know, you can't ever get so that you're artificially inducing a lowest stave on the barrel. But instead of trying to use science and technology to how much product can I cram down my soil's throat, I'm actually going the other way. And what's the bare minimum that I need to apply so that my crop can be successful? That's my focus shift. And you know, like part of where it really hit home for me was, you know, 1 year, third-party agronomy company I was working with was absolutely convinced from their data that I needed to be seeding I was growing some soft weight spring wheat, trying to get malt or ethanol for it.
Yeah.
And so I was really shooting for a very, very high yield. And we had all the water in the world. It was, you know, in the teens, it was nice and wet, you know, 13 through 16. And they were like, yeah, you know, our work has shown that you got to put 150 pounds of nitrogen down. You need, I forget what it was for the rest, but I had this balanced ration that they had recommended. And so we put that down, and then we kind of put down some strips right beside it where it was just kind of more of a normal rate. And it, yeah, I'll never forget the yield where we had 150 pounds of N was 17 bushels to the acre less. We had like thrown the whole checkbook at it, put all the groceries at it, and it actually yielded lower. And I took the data to the third-party agronomist and like, yeah, this isn't working. Like that was, you know, so we ended up doing the 1 acre check strips, right?
So what was the explanation for that? Because that's counterintuitive to my understanding. Was it
Yeah.
is it your PN ratios that were out of whack?
You know, I don't. That's another thing that, you know, I'm still trying to wrap my head around is balancing cations, and I don't know whether that pays or not. But I just think you're just so far over on the other end of the bell curve that, you know, the only person making money off of it is the retailer selling you the fertilizer. So that's why now I've come to this understanding of, you know, in my immobile nutrients, I want to make sure that I'm at a replacement rate. So, you know, if I'm pulling 30 pounds of P2O5, you know, I want to be putting 30 pounds of P2O5 back. But nitrogen is one I'm still playing with, and I'm trying to, you know, learn from my soils and see what they're able to actually supply on their own. I don't do the zero check strips anymore, but we are, you know, using soil testing. We know what's in the bank, you know, in the soil, and then we're applying what we figure that we need to get to our target yields. And like, people don't believe me, but last year my farm average on barley was not 100 bushels the acre, but was within spitting distance of 100 bushels the acre. And I think we averaged about 34 pounds of actual N on that. Like, no one believes me.
So how much of that would you attribute to, how long has that land been camped or zero tilled? 1983?
Where that land was, I hasn't seen steel since 1971. So it's been continuous crop since the lift program ended. And then, so it's continuous crop with diskers, and then in 83, Dad switched to an air seeder.
Okay.
So it's, yeah, almost as long as I've been alive.
So I tell this story, and guys don't believe me. I rented some farmland south of Kindersley. Shout out Nick Kazicki, if you're listening. I was out there spraying it, and I was seeding it. And I noticed in both driving across the field in my pickup truck and in my tractor, this field felt different.
Okay.
Than, you spend enough time in a tractor, you notice these things.
Yeah.
Like, it felt different. And I'd go across the road to a lower piece of another field, and it didn't feel the same. I'd go back across, felt different. What's going on?
Yeah.
Well, that field's been zero tilled since like 1981 or something, or 83 or something like that too. It was spongier.
Yeah.
That I could feel from the cab of an 800 versatile.
Yeah.
And I don't know how it yielded relative to anything else, but I just wonder if, there's some organic matter level or something going on.
Yeah.
Just from 40 years of.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot of things. The last 10 years or so, it bugs in a jug, the term soil biology, whatever people want to use, regenerative ag, it's kind of got a little bit overblown, a little bit too hyped for my liking. But the way that I kind of look at it is, without having tillage like fallow in there, we're not disturbing, the bugs that are in the soil microbiome. And all the years of putting residue on the top and then not working that in, we've built up this really big population of decomposers. And, I remember when I was just out of university that we would see 3 years of residue on the soil surface.
Yeah.
And I could walk into one of our fields and tell you what was the last 3 crops. Because they were all still sitting there on the soil surface. And, now we can pull off a 70 bushel durum crop, and, by, within 2 years, so the following summer, the only durum residue that's remaining is the sticks standing up. Anything that was on the soil surface is gone.
Really?
One of the challenges that I have now is that we have so many decomposing bacteria that it consumes our residue too fast. I've actually put back-to-back cereals in my rotation so that I can keep the ground covered. I've had to take broadleafs out of my rotation, for root rot, but also, lentils and canola don't have a whole lot of residue left over.
Right.
But I had to go back-to-back cereals to try and get some of that material back on the surface to protect the soil. So I think, when you quit tilling the guts out of the ground, I think things are, the bug population changes, and they adjust to their roles. And one of the things that I firmly believe that happens is if we take and don't till that residue in, let those decomposers do their thing, it's releasing the nutrients for the next crop. And I know in corn country in the US, I've traveled down there lots, they always say that you have to till that residue back in so that, that breaks down, and then you can get those nutrients back the following year. And we're in a situation now where the bugs just do it for us. And I know that this is something I'm still trying to wrap my head around, and it's maybe a little bit theoretical, but like the building block of every cell is ATP. And I cannot pronounce it correctly, but ATP is essentially, as I understand it, like an amino acid or, building block for nitrogen and phosphorus. So if you have more bugs, you literally have more NP in your soil.
Yeah. Well, I was an early adopter of continuous cropping, zero till over in our part of the world there. And I thought it would take 3 to 5 years before I'd start seeing a benefit from it. I didn't understand really what that benefit was what was the driving force behind it.
Yeah.
I don't think. I didn't know. just told me it's going to take 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
To see a benefit from it.
Well, and you know, I think for us, it actually was probably closer to 10.
10.
But, you know, for us, the driving factor, core memories. I remember, I think they call them haboobs in the desert with dust storms.
Oh yeah.
I remember dust storms in the early 80s. And because, every third field around us was summer fallow. And, it'd be dry in the spring and then the wind would kick up and start blowing the summer fallow. And I remember, guys going out with cultivators trying to bring up lumps to hold the ground down. I remember mom and dad taking the old water truck out to the field because the summer fallow was starting to blow. And all they did with the water truck is just blow water
Oh really?
on the corner of the field to try and make some mud so that corner wouldn't cause the rest of the field to blow. And that was why Dad got into zero till.
Yeah.
And why I got into precision ag was, so we're zero tilling and we had no markers.
Yeah, I can't see where you're going.
So like literally had taken a Sharpie and drawn lines on the windshield of the tractor. So try to line up the last pass with this line that you drew on an angle on the windshield. And yeah.
My hired man took his handheld GPS and stuck it up against the windshield, and he'd get it lined up, and he'd just try to stay on that.
Right? Yeah.
Handheld Jeep, like that was, and
That's
they weren't as accurate as they are now. Right?
Exactly. That's pretty wild. Like that. Yeah. That for us, that was getting into yield monitoring was, that old saying, you can't manage what you can't measure. And so, that, was important. And then guidance and steering was huge for cutting down on overlap. And so after I'd sold my land, like that was kind of my business was, getting that technology onto guys' farms so that they could cut down their overlap. And, a lot of guys just wanted to be able to kind of relax, turn the corner and let the tractor steer so that they could relax. But, they're like, well, this will pay for itself. So it was an easy sell, right?
Yeah.
And everything that I was doing in the, late 90s and early 2000s with precision ag is all standard equipment on equipment. Like you walk into the dealership and, I want this tractor and it's going to come with everything that I was retrofitting. So, it was an easy sell at the time, but it was also not going to be a business that was going to be long-lived for me.
Right. Yeah.
I was essentially competing against the OEMs by the time I decided to become an employee.
Right.
So, it was, and that's, again, I was finding all these massive advantages and savings on my own farm, and I was just trying to offer that to everyone else. And
yeah, you were an early adopter of that.
Yeah.
It was probably a tough sale at first because it was.
Yeah.
Was it or not?
Well, the price was the biggest hurdle to get around.
Yeah.
Because $10,000 today is not the same as $10,000 in 1998 or 2001, right?
Right.
And kind of a bare bones guidance system was close to 10 grand when I started, and then they had dropped it down to about 5 grand. By the time I was an employee of the company, it was 5 grand for guidance and steering. Everything had gotten cheaper over time, and so there was more customers, but it took more work to get the same amount of income. Just kind of the nature of things, right? But we were seeing, anyone that knows the Rosetown area, everything is square. We don't have fences. We don't have tree rows. Only trees are where Grandpa planted one, right? And, so I was seeing 5% savings on a sprayer that, like, I won't say I was the first guy to put sectional control on a John Deere sprayer in Saskatchewan, but man, I had to be like one of the first.
Yeah.
And I was getting 5% savings on square and rectangular shaped fields. And it was just turning the boom on and off at the right time. And maybe that last pass coming back, it might take where you might overlap before you had sectional control, the system's turning that boom off, and you had confidence that boom should be off. right? So you're getting 5% savings there. And yeah, and so now, I mean, well, my first variable rate was done in 2008. So I've been doing variable rate fertilizer since 2008. And then now we're at a point where we have 10 zones in our fields, and we vary every single nutrient that we put down. Whether it's seed or whether it's fertilizer, everything is variable rate.
So all your fertilizer goes down at seeding time then?
Yep.
So how many compartments would you have?
I've got 4 on the drill, 3 that are primarily used,
Yeah.
but 4 compartments on the drill. And then I've got a liquid wagon that's got 2 tanks for nitrogen, for what, you know, whatever product you want to put in. But nitrogen's the one I put in, the 2 big tanks. And then I've got a small phosphorus tank, but you know, I can put. So the way that my drill is set up now, I get a twin shank set up, and I could put dry fertilizer on either knife. I could put liquid fertilizer on either knife. I'm completely flexible. So if, you know, I walked into a smoking deal on liquid fertilizer one year, I can put that on. If, you know, economics are such, liquid fertilizer is too expensive, I would lose a lot of capacity, but I could go all granular. So now typically what I'm doing is I'm doing granular phos, but I don't put anything in there'll be no fertilizer in the seed furrow. Everything will be off to the side.
Really? I guess, eh?
And you know, where that comes from is
No phosphate or nothing in the seed, eh?
no, everything gets put off in the sideband for us. And really, you know, for us, after so many years, you know, our soil test values are such, like we can get a crop kicked off and started and going, and it doesn't need anything in the furrow to get it. You know, there's no pop-up effect from having phosphorus in the furrow anymore.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we've kind of built our soils to a level where, you know, they're self-sustaining for that week or 2 or 3 or whatever it takes for a root to get over. You know, and I'm kind of, you know, going back to the soil microbiome. I am of the opinion that, you know, I don't think that fertilizer kills bugs in the soil, but it just makes them not necessary. So plants don't build an association with whatever bug that's in the soil because, well, hey, I got free fertilizer here.
Oh, I see what you mean, yeah.
So I don't need this association with you, Mr. Fixer. I've got this Prilla fertilizer over here.
Right.
So, you know, I'm not ever going to be in a situation where I think that we don't need fertilizer. I do think the nutrient cycle is broken unless I can get whatever person that consumes my grain to come back to my field and do number 1 and 2 on my field.
Right.
The nutrient cycle is broken. I'm going to have to use something to replace that. So I'm just trying to get down to the bare minimum so that I don't have to put down any more than what's necessary.
What do you think your savings would be on fertilizer with this?
Oh man, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, it's tough because dollar figure today is different from the dollar figure yesterday, right? But I can tell you on the same land base, I went from buying 5 Super Bs at 2800 in a year to put on cereals to, in 2024, I bought 2. And in 2025, I bought 4, but I have about 1 left over. So I've probably cut, I would say probably, it would be fair to say I probably use about 3/5 the amount of nitrogen. I don't think it'd be fair to say I use half the nitrogen I used to, because in 2024 we had very high soil test levels. So I think that skews things a little bit. But, you know, I could be proven wrong at any point in time. We might have a year in the future where, you know what, our soil test values stink. Yeah. And I might have to go and buy a bunch. I don't know. But what I'm not doing anymore is ordering 5 Super Bs at 2800 because I ordered 5 last year and the year before that and the year before that.
Yeah.
So, so now what I'm doing is, it's always cheaper to buy your liquid N in the summer. So, I'll start checking prices in August, and, probably August to November somewhere is where I'll fill up on nitrogen. But I'll probably kind of hedge things. I'll probably order 2 Super Bs in the summer, and, then I'll get my soil test results back, and then I'll kind of figure out where I'm at and what my requirements are. And then if I need more, then I'll buy more. So yeah, it's just different.
Yeah.
I think the amount of savings is kind of fluid. It changes a little bit every year, but
you feel there's some anyways, right?
yeah. So
Interesting study.
yeah, it's definitely kind of like seat of the pants agronomy. It's just learning it's not coming from a textbook. It's lived experience, right?
Textbooks.
Well,
They're a good base, but I mean,
yeah.
Situations.
Yeah, and I think we kind of get into this paradigm in Saskatchewan where now we're currently sitting in a situation where seemingly everyone's gone to the U of S. And gosh, I'm probably going to get the names wrong, but I think like Don Rennie was the dean of ag when Les Henry went to university, and then Les Henry taught Jeff Shano, and then Jeff Shano's taught everybody that is making recommendations right now. And so I'm not saying that those guys have done bad work, but I think we're kind of all using that, knowledge base.
Yeah, makes sense.
And it's maybe a little bit on the limited side. I don't for a second think that any of the work that was done by Wesco on pop-up effect of P was wrong. But I mean, we're dealing with soils that were tilled every other year or every third year, right?
When is that research done, right?
Right? Yeah. And so now, we're kind of in this new dynamic where, I've got ground that literally hasn't been summer followed, hasn't been worked since, my grandfather got a check from the LIFT program, right? And don't get me wrong, like I have in the past described myself as a never tiller. I've kind of got over that, trying to, lay claim to some sort of, title to that. I, in fact, have bought a small 4-shank subsoiler, and I'm out experimenting with subsoiling to see if I, can remove compaction from the top foot and get a response, right? And I mean, I've yet to take it to yield. It's still dabbling. But, I've got replicated trials that I'm doing with a third party. And, we're checking out what's going on in a barley crop. And it's the piece of ground that's been the longest in zero till. So it was kind of a, close your eyes, Dad, we're going to till this one. And he's like, well, if you learn something from it, it's worth it, right? And so, we're playing with that, but the key component in it is that the surface still has to be covered. I will never go back to the days where we've got a dust storm.
Jesus.
There's no such thing as, it's like a no disturber, low disturbance ripper. I mean, it's invasive. You're putting a chunk of steel in the ground 14 to 16 inches.
Yeah.
It's going to be invasive. But the thing is that I don't want the surface disturbed. I want that knife to go down there, and I want it to lift the soil and have as little soil disturbance on the surface. And it's actually quite fascinating. I had to get the old meter stick out, and it fluffed up the soil literally 8 inches going through there. It's nuts how it almost becomes bottomless. It's so spongy after you go through it with this thing.
This is the soil up 8 inches.
Yeah, like I put it across the meter stick across the top, and then used the tape measure. It was 8 inches, and I'm like, I don't believe it.
Do you see year over year?
I just started doing it.
Okay.
Like last fall. I took delivery, and it came in just before seeding, and so I had to take the tractor to town, pick it up, and I couldn't resist. On the way home from the dealership, I stuck it in the ground, and then I realized, oh, why did I pick this field? Because I had authority put on it in the fall, and here I am out ripping it up. So I quit in the spring, and then I went out last fall, and I intentionally picked some fields that I wanted to do some trials on. One that I am replicated trials taking the yield. It's 4 trials, 4 strips. I don't know what they are. They'd be 50 feet wide by a half mile long. And I've replicated those 4 times, but then I got some other fields where it's like, that looks like a great angle. So I just head out that way, and I just, went for a couple of hours.
What kind of testing are you doing? Yield test? Are you doing porosity? Or...
We tried to get some soil moisture probes in there. And unfortunately, I don't know why, but you have to do first call to get soil moisture probes installed. And especially that field that I was working in, because it's got a natural gas line in it.
Oh, I see.
And they couldn't get there in time to get those. Like, they had plenty of notice, but the first call guys never showed up, so we couldn't put soil moisture probes in. And so, yeah, other than no, I don't need a penetrometer, because I've got a rod with a ball bearing welded on the end, and it's like literally where you till it, it's like you push it in with one finger. Where it hasn't been tilled, like you jump on it, hope you don't lose your balance and bend the rod.
Really?
Yeah, but it's only down to the depth, that the opener goes. So, it's that 14-inch range that we're ripping up. So we'll see how it goes in the end. I don't know what to expect of it. It's kind of tough when it's a 4 shank. It's literally 3-point, goes on the back of my, medium chore tractor kind of thing.
And wait, it's something big.
Yeah.
How do you know if you don't learn and test, right?
Our farm size is not big enough that I'm just going to go out and buy, a full size ripper and on a whim, and I'll try it, right?
Yeah.
So I started small, and at the end of the day, if this doesn't make yield, or make sufficient yield, then it's like, well, okay, I've still got the thing. It can sit in the fence row, and I can go after harvest. I can do the headlands where the trucks went and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm not out anything that I can't afford to lose. But at the time that I was doing it last fall, and then looking out the spring when I seeded it, it's really had to resist the urge to call the dealership and order a big one.
Oh, really?
That's
initial thoughts.
The initial thought on it was like this. There's no way that this can lose money. But yeah, I mean, being patient, we'll take it to yield. We'll see, and just go from there. But I mean, I left some strips. I was out in a field that I seeded to Durham, and I left this 10-foot strip where I didn't do it. But on either side, it's done. And the difference in the Durham is, the lawns are up to your crotch, where it is not tilled, and then where you ripped, it's up to your belt. So there's an obvious height difference there. Is that going to turn into yield? I don't know. So it's a bit of a...
Will you be able to test for yield with your monitor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That was the whole point of laying out in the barley field where I did the replicated strips, is we flagged it all off. I'm going to make one trip down the middle of the treatment. I'm going to get the yield. We'll dump it into the grain cart and weigh it. I'll have the map data as well. And then we'll come back and on either side, and we'll be able to compare whether there's an improvement or not. So if there's 5 to 7 bushels there, okay, yeah, you know what? I would say that's probably a sufficient enough gain that I'm going to go and order a big one, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, if there's anything less than that, it's going to be kind of, well, I'm going to have to really sharpen the pencil and make sure that this works, right? So it's like horrifically hard on the tractor.
I bet.
It's 3.5 miles an hour. I mean, so this is a 3-point unit on a front wheel assist tractor, and half the time the front tires weren't touching the ground. And
you need a big
yeah,
tractor.
the tractor was not ballasted properly, but at the same point in time, was pulling so hard, I was actually afraid to ballast the tractor, because if I did, what if I broke the tractor? You know, like what if I snapped something inside the driveline? What if I, you know, literally broke the tractor in two because the front end's so heavy and there's such a, you know, pull on the drawbar that, or on the 3-point. You know, I was actually, I, I got into the craziest predicament. I hit a spot where, you know, the grain car had driven beside a full combine.
Oh.
And I hit that, and then the tractor started to do this massive wheelie, and I hit the clutch, and there I was. Like I was stopped there, and I didn't know what to do. Like, how do I? And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll lift the implement out of the ground. Well, I made the front end go higher. And so then what happened is I started, oh, okay, I guess I'll back up. So I started to back up, and as soon as the points got out from underneath compacted soil from, I don't know if it was a combine or the grain cart, but as soon as it got out from underneath that compacted soil, well, then the points popped out of the ground and the front end of the tractor smashed. I thought I snapped my tractor in half. I thought the axle was broke. I thought I did all the damage.
Yeah.
It's incredibly hard how that ground pulls, and that's something
that's hard. That is extreme soil where you're at.
Yeah, it is true.
Yeah.
But I will never forget, I won't name names, but you know, back when we were big in the Sask Soil Conservation Association, you know, I had one agronomist tell me that, you know, it was always a big discussion, is the ground going to get hard under zero till? And he's like, absolutely no chance that it will ever do that, because you will always have, you know, one root channel breaking down, and then that turns into a macropore, and then the next year you get another one, and it's just constantly. And then plus also your heavy clay soils, you know, they'll get dry and they will crack, and you know, and so that it will naturally alleviate compaction. And something I found that led me to the purchase of this little mini ripper was a study done by, I think the researcher's name was Alexander Daig, I think, from NDSU. And he had, you know, in North Dakota, they have clay soils, and they have non-cracking clays and they have cracking clays. And he had found in their cracking clays that the crack opens up in the same spot here, and then the next year it's in the same spot, and the year after that. And we were always told it's a different spot all the time, right? And so, you know, it's...
What is the explanation for that?
Well, I don't remember if Daig ever explored why that is, but, you know, it's just... I've heard the stories from, and again, I think it all comes back to it's a small group of people that do all the teaching at the U of S, right?
Yeah.
That, you know, we don't have compaction here because we got these freeze thaw cycles. And he had found two things at NDSU in his studies, is that the cracks form in the same spot year over year over year. It's not a different crack everywhere. And also it takes, and I don't remember the number, but it's dozens of freeze thaw cycles to break compaction. And yeah, we get that at the surface, but we don't get that at depth.
Right.
You know, as you go down, there's going to be, at some point, there will be one freeze and one thaw. And that's not enough, especially in dry conditions, to break compaction. It takes multiple events. And so you'll see our soils in the spring, they're very fluffy at the top, but it's only where it's had that successive freeze thaw cycles,
Yeah.
but it's never down below 4 inches. And, you know, going back to when I was working at Ag Leader, you know, I used to go to the US all the time. So I became very inspired by American agronomy. And so there's lots of things that I've kind of tried and I wanted to learn more, and over the years, and you know, some of the things that I haven't experimented with, maybe everything, but there's a lot of things that I find quite fascinating comparing American agronomy to ours. A big thing in the US is balancing cations. You know, you need to, you know, K to MG ratios and P to K ratios.
And that's a US thing?
Yeah.
So you have these different what's the right word for it? Different lineages, I guess, maybe, right?
Yeah.
In the study,
Yeah.
from granny to
Yep. And so, yeah,
less.
for us, like we were all taught the sufficiency approach. So you soil test and, you know, here's your yield target, here's your soil test value. And so we were taught, to get to your target, you need X amount of pounds of this nutrient to make a bushel of that commodity. And so you A minus B equals C, right? And that was your application rate. And down in the US, they're all about balancing cations where you need certain ratios. And I think like I've gone to, since I got involved with SAS Pulse Growers, I haven't gone down to the US to do, like I called it my professional development. I would go to a soils conference every year and just to hone my craft, right?
Yeah.
And, so you go down there and to a certain extent, like your soil tests kind of become like dick measuring contests. And so, I'm having coffee at coffee break with a guy that farms in the Red River Valley of North Dakota, and he was talking about his cation exchange capacity of CEC levels in his soil. And he's like, yeah, well, we got like crazy heavy soil. All these guys talking about their CECs of 12 to 17, thinking they got heavy soil. And, mine are like 28 to 35. And I'm like, I wonder what mine are. So I open up my phone, pull up a soil test, 48 to 72. Like, so we have this crazy high cation exchange capacity at our place. And so what I've kind of discovered over time is that at these CEC levels, balancing cations like they do when you got a CEC at 8 in Arkansas, it works there, but it doesn't work here. We'd have to apply so much product to try, like to get my K to MG ratios correct, I'd have to apply, I don't know, 3 tons to the acre of potash or something crazy like that. It just doesn't work.
And why? And it's just the uniqueness of the soil, or
Yeah.
the uniqueness combination of the soil and the 40 years of zero till.
Well, CEC comes from soil texture, right?
Okay.
So the higher clay content, the more sites you have for exchange, so the higher your CEC.
Okay.
And, so you get into, lots of parts of, the southern corn belt, and you're not dealing with clay soils. I mean, there are clay soils, don't get me wrong. I don't want to make it sound like Americans they all farm crap soil. No, that's not the case. But it's just, generally speaking, from my experiences down there, they think heavy soils are 17, and I think heavy soils are 40.
Oh yeah.
So it's just a different perspective. And then, I think the gentleman's name was like William Albright or something like that, and that was one of the guys about, doing the work on balancing the cations on an ideal soil. And then there was, a researcher named Bear, and he had a group of researchers, and they come up with, here's the ideal soil, right? And you got 5% organic matter and 45% mineral and, 50% air, pore space, right? And then in that 45% mineral, you should have a ratio, right? And we've just, in Canada, look, U of S has just taught us sufficiency method, like I described earlier, right?
So would that be because it's tough to move the needle? You're talking CEC levels and
Yeah,
Canada for that?
I don't know why
If a good
Yeah.
soil is at 40, there's a lot of clay soil in Alberta, Saskatchewan,
Yeah.
Manitoba, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that might be exactly why
Just focus
we've
on,
never done that whole balancing cations. I'm not sure.
focus on where you can move the needle, maybe.
Yeah. And then also, I suppose some of it too is, a lot of when that work was being done at the U of S, we're talking about young soils. I mean, they'd only been broke 50 to 75 years, if that, right?
Right.
And then you compare, some places in the US, I mean, you're talking the 13 colonies, right? So, it's generations more crop production off of there. So,
Like how many years say in Iowa, for example, Ames, Iowa, has that been broken and cultivated?
oh, that's a great question. I'm not sure. I mean, a lot more than us.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I couldn't even take a guess, but I think Iowa was already a state for the Civil War, right? So that's before 1860. So, they would have been doing cultivation a lot earlier than us.
Yeah.
Probably at least 40, 50 years more, if not longer, right? So, their soils are a little bit older, a little bit more weathered, tilled a lot more, obviously, right? So it's just different. And I kind of find it fascinating, but I'm still, there's not everything. You can't parachute corn agronomy into Rosetown, Saskatchewan and have complete success.
Right.
But you can get inspiration from it. And so, notions that I've learned down there is, listening to agronomists talk in Iowa about, maximizing the amount of nodes per acre on soybeans. Like you want to take and get the maximum amount of nodes because that's every node is potential pod. I've never heard anyone talk about, well, yeah, on your lentils, you just try to get as many pods as you can an acre. No one ever talks about how you get to the pods, right? Like no one's talking about, production practices that would increase the amount of nodes on a plant, right?
Does that mainly do, well, the research dollars are going to go onto soybeans, but
I
more than
think,
lentils, right?
right? Yeah.
Like it's a,
But, like there's those things that, that you can, be inspired by and trial on your own farm. And so I've just tried to think about, ways that I could try to increase the amount of nodes that I've got on my pulse crops. And I kind of try to think about, on cereals, spikelet development, like a corn producer in the U.S. Midwest talks about ear development.
can you measure this and yeah, benchmark it?
Well,
Track it, or?
like one example that I come across on corn is, so they're really big on population and agronomists that I talked to, when I worked, for a U.S. company, they were talking about getting, the planting rates right, the seed population correct was the biggest jump in increasing yield. It was like kind of the hockey stick graph
Okay.
of corn yield was getting population correct. Because they used to have their rows used to be what? Well, literally the width of a horse's ass, like 38 or 42 inches or something like that. Because
makes
then
sense,
the
yeah.
horse could go down the row.
Yeah.
And so they tightened that up to 30 inches because they weren't using horses anymore. But then getting the right plant spacing. So I think it is on 30-inch rows, you want to plant every 5.6 inches. And that gets you about 32,000 plants per acre. So you want a final stand of that. But I've heard it talked about, like, if you have, a big windstorm and you got 32,000 plants per acre and your corn all snaps and falls over, well, you probably didn't have enough potash. You were diluting the amount of potassium by all of those corn plants. So now you're faced with two choices. Reduce your planting population so you don't dilute the potassium, or add potassium. And so I use that as kind of inspiration. And so, a lot of the things that I like to play with on our farm, and I do a lot less of it now because I think I've got a lot of the basics right. But all the things that I can adjust for free, I work on those.
Oh yeah.
So I got to seed a field, but I get to pick when I seed the field, how deep I seed the field, how fast I seed the field, right?
Yeah.
I get to pick, what's my seeding rate going to be? There's all these factors that are essentially, I call them free because you got to do them anyhow, but just how you do them can influence yield. So, I've worked on my seeding speed. I've worked on my seeding depth. I still work on seeding rate. And it's a fun debate for me with a lot of people. I was talking with a grower at Lanigan today, and he literally seeds his barley twice as heavy as I do. And last year I participated in a trial through Sask barley, and the lowest seeding rate, 90 pounds per acre, was the highest yield on my farm. I'm still trying to discover why I can get away with very low seeding rates and make yield. So not only am I less seed in the ground, less treatment in the ground, I get higher yield. And I mean, I can't explain it. I've done these trials for 20 years because I I keep messing with planting populations because I kind of figure that maybe, durum might be a little bit different than wheat, or this variety might be a little bit different from that variety. So I'm trying it all the time. And I used to take and graph it out in Excel, and you'd have a line chart, and it didn't matter. Like, I could have 14 plants per square foot, or I could have 27 plants per square foot. And the line was even at the top. There's no difference in moisture, no difference in protein, no difference in yield. So I'm like, okay, well, 14 yields as good as 27, but if I get wireworm, I might get below 14, and am I giving up yield? I'll plant 18.
Oh, I see.
So it gives me a little buffer. 18 is going to yield the same as 14, so I'll put an extra 4 plants in there just cause, right?
Yeah, interesting.
So I've done a lot of that work and on my own farm, and I kind of encourage everyone to like go out and try it on your own. Like, all the equipment comes with all the tools. All you got to do is just have a curious mind, go out and do it, and then look at the data. It's really simple. But
sorry.
I think it's something that everyone, instead of just going, well, they say I should plant 180 pounds of my barley, and I should be 40 plants per square foot. Try it. I mean, it costs nothing to turn the seeding rate and, go down and then drive 2 miles and then turn back to where you think it should be. Yeah. It's free, and at the worst, you screw up 2 miles, right?
Yeah.
But maybe you learn something from those 2 miles, and then the next year you go, you know what? I'm going to take and I'm going to do 2 miles, and then I'm going to go over here a little bit, and I'm going to do 2 miles, and then I'm going to go back to my normal rate, and I'm going to see if it was a fluke.
Well, I saw it. It's funny you mentioned this on Twitter or X. I saw a post today. The gentleman on there was talking about his reduced seeding rate with this particular seeder he's got, seed distribution system on there. And I think it was canola. He'd reduced his seeding rate such that he'd save $90,000 with my understanding. Little to no significant impact on yield.
I think those savings are out there. One thing that I've always said is that there is no other farm like mine. And that's not to say that my farm is special. It's just no other farm has got the same cropping history, the same management history,
right,
the same, exact same. So somebody else might have the exact same seed hawk that I do, but all the other variables are different.
Yeah.
And, their farm's over there and my farm's over here, right? There's spatial differences, there's management differences, there's all these things. So my farm's unique. So I want to take and figure out what I can do that makes my farm better at the least cost, right?
Yeah.
So, like seeding speed is, when I started doing the seeding speed, I don't remember if it was Canola Council of Canada or Sask Canola, or I don't know who it was telling growers, like, here's a picture. This was seeded at 5 miles an hour. This was seeded at 6. This was seeded at 3. And the 3 always had more plants, right? And so therefore 3 is better, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, why don't I try it out on my own? And so I did it across multiple commodities, and all we did, it was really simple. The protocol was about as simple as it gets. Okay, seed for this speed for an hour, and then speed up for an hour, and then speed up for an hour, and then speed up for an hour. And by that time, you're done the field, right? And if you pick the normal seeding speed is one of the speeds in the middle, you end up finishing your field at the exact same time. It costs you no difference in time. So normally, if you seed at, say, 5 miles an hour and you want to try 2 different seeding speeds, so seed for an hour at 5, seed for an hour at 4.75, seed for an hour at 5.25. In the end, you average out at 5. Hasn't cost you any time at all. But now you got a data set of slower speed and higher speed.
What did you find out? Because quarter mile per hour seems irrelevant to me.
Yeah, and always there was, again, I think with everything, there's a point of diminishing return, and just going slower doesn't. It's one of those things, like if it was linear, like going 0.1 miles per hour would have the highest yield,
Right.
right? So, I mean, you do at some point in time, things, you lose productivity, and, any higher yield gains are offset by some productivity losses. So, I was kind of finding that, yeah, you know what? I was fine at 5 miles an hour, right? And I don't,
It's kind of been kind of the standard.
yeah, right? Like there was no panic for me I don't need to go 3 miles an hour because again, my seeding system, it wasn't the seed hawk at the time. It was a C-shank drill, but so I'm not saying go 5 miles an hour with your seed hawk. I'm saying everyone should go out and do this trial and see what the right speed is for their drill and their conditions. So yeah, it just worked out that, hey, I'm good at 5 miles an hour. I'm not taking a yield hit. If I go faster, yeah, I gain a little productivity, but you look at the histogram and the histogram would show you like, here's the meat, 4 3/4 to 5 1/4. If you're in that speed range, that's the heart of the curve. Go with it,
Love it, yeah.
right? You don't have to overthink it too much and go 3. But that's stuff that's pretty easy to look at, and you only have to do it once when you get a different drill. Once it's done, it's kind of done until you get a different drill,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So I know the speed that I want to run my seed hawk at, and depending on the commodity, it's 4 1/4, 4 3/4. I don't need to get in too much of a hurry. I end up throwing too much soil if you go too fast, right? So I do have to go slower with the twin knife, but it's because I've tried it and played with it that I know what works for me. I'd never recommend that to anyone else. Like if someone else thinks they should be seeding canola at 3.5 miles an hour, by all means, go right ahead.
Well, and their farm's unique too, right?
Right? Their farm's unique. If it works for them, it works for them. I just like these things where I go out and try this, and everyone's trying to ram a whole lot of acres through the smallest piece of equipment they can because they don't want to spend too much money on equipment cost, right? So here's something where you can find where your peak efficiency is, and yeah, I just like to play with those things. Those things have been a constant driver for me, and quite often you end up in a conversation with some guy and he says, "Oh, I do it this way," and I think, maybe I should too, or maybe I shouldn't, and
Test it.
yeah, I try it, right? Like that was the thing. I had an agronomist at a retail telling me like, oh, this is when Twitter had first started, and it turned into an in real life conversation based off of a Twitter conversation we both participated in about seeding rates on durum. And this guy's like, "Oh, you got to be seeding your durum at like 130 pounds an acre. Like you need to like bare minimum like 35 plants per square foot." I'm not kidding. Like the data at Indian Head shows that here's the where the peak yield is. I mean, and that's where my 14 to 27 came from. Was I'm going to prove you wrong. And and the funny thing is when Dad had always said, well, Grandpa and like his grandpa and his dad, they always seeded durum at a bushel and a peck.
Yeah.
That's 80 pounds.
Yeah.
Right? And gosh, when you took the TKW and the 1,000 kernel weights and worked it all back, it's like, yeah, that year was 80 pounds.
So I kind of forget if it was a bushel an acre or 80 pound. I forget.
Yeah.
When I first started, what guys were seeding at. And then all of a sudden, one day I became aware that, some of the more innovative guys are pushing two bushels an acre.
Yeah.
I think it was. I thought, like, oh, well, you could do it with an air seeder. We weren't doing that with diskers.
Right. Yeah.
And, but it sounds like it's kind of stepped back from 2 bushels down to.
Well, I have. I don't know that everyone else has. I mean, I had that same feeling too. I was back one day when I was riding around with a guy who was seeding wheat up at Wilkie, and I was trying to fine tune his steering system that I had sold him, and he was seeding his wheat at 120 pounds an acre, and and I was kind of thinking in my head, it's like, wow, should I be getting Dad to push like that high on durum, right?
Yeah.
In the end, I mean, I think we've kind of settled in on where we need to be on our rates. We can always still tweak them. I think there's still variety changes, but some of the easy low-hanging fruit and, in my agronomy approach that I've learned with precision ag, that low-hanging fruit's been picked now. So I really don't have any more, what's the next big advantage that I'm going to come up with.
Right.
It's kind of there now, but and everybody is kind of getting that way too. I think the low-hanging fruit's kind of been picked. So,
I often could see the direction. Well, I thought I could see where the direction farming was going, just with GPS and
yeah,
whatnot and drills. But you never could really, you couldn't tweak it ever like you could a factory or any other
I suppose, right?
production models, right? But you're getting to that point now. So you got to now you're not overlapping, right?
Yeah,
A foot or 18 inches, whatever the heck,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
So you're making those savings. You got the GPS guys I hear like 9% on assisted steering on
Yeah,
savings, right? Just cross their. Well, you maybe threw that number out too.
yeah,
Significant.
yeah. No,
So now you're tweaking with.
yeah. Well, finding the other things to improve.
Yeah.
I invested in RTK, I don't know how many years ago. We've had RTK for, I know it's got to be pushing 15 years. And RTK, I have like 10 millimeter repeatability everywhere on my farm. So my drill is 60 feet. And so I set my guidance width at 60 feet. And I actually have a 60-foot drill intentionally because my fields are 1 mile long by a quarter mile wide. They're 160 acres, they're quarter by a mile. But it divides evenly into that.
Oh yeah.
And so all my fields are exactly 1,320 feet wide, or 2,640. But I started that off of the survey pin that's at the northwest corner of the yard. And so every field on my farm is referenced off that survey pin. And I know that that's unique. I mean, you're not going to do that in a lot of places in Saskatchewan or anywhere else.
Right.
You're going to have a fence row here or whatever. But the way I set it up, and our roads are not straight, they're crooked, they're in the wrong spot too. So, I have a guest pass on every section. So, it's not perfect. But it's the thing is though, is that except for that guest pass, everything else is perfect. So I've got it down to a point where I don't think I can take any more overlap out of the system.
Yeah.
It's as perfect as it's ever going to get, and so I've got to find other ways to gain yield and gain efficiency.
Yeah.
I've done all the low hanging fruit. It's
Interesting.
yeah, that's why now I probably got 500 notes in my phone. I'm trying to always tweak the system and improve the system, right? I'm looking at I haven't even started harvest. And I'm still trying to fix things that I see right now. And could be little tweaks and like, I should look at this herbicide for that commodity next year. Right now, currently I've got, pretty bad sclerotinia in my chickpeas. And so now I'm kind of like, okay, well, what other options do I have for controlling sclerotinia? Because, that chickpea field 2 years from now is supposed to be canola, right? So I got to be thinking ahead. These are the things that, the phrase that I want to avoid on my farm is I got to go. Because if I'm at a point where I was like, holy crap, I've got to get this done, I got to go. That means that I've probably screwed up about 50 steps before that.
Right.
And I've put myself in a situation where I got to go. Like, I got to go spray this field, right? Yeah. And so I'm trying to look at those things that are ahead of that so that I don't get to this point where I got to go.
That's where the whole system breaks down, is when you're in a panic, you don't take proper notes, you don't record the data.
Well, and I think you get into a situation where you get so focused on that problem, that task at hand, that you're missing detail around you.
Probably, yeah.
And so that's where, like I'm, I was working on the combine in the shop yesterday, and I decided, I've been on my feet for a couple hours, old knees, concrete floor. So I'm gonna sit down, grab a bottle of water, and I just started going through the guide to crop protection. I suppose I could have gone on TikTok or something like that and, desk scroll.
Yeah.
But, I just started going through, okay, sclerotinia control and chickpea. What are my options, right? And, that led to, I got a phone call into a chem rep today, about something that I might look at for next year, right? Or certainly if, not next year, but, this field 2 years down the road with canola. So, I'm trying to whittle away at those little things that get to me to those decisions where it's like, I gotta go. I want to avoid that moment and try and get all the details right before that. And a lot of those things just take a little bit of planning, and and that's all just part of the honing the system.
Yeah.
Seeding order is another thing that, just becomes, every time you introduce a new crop, it's like, well, when do I seed it?
Right.
And I've got this system down now that where I have a certain seeding order so that come harvest, you can go out and desiccate your lentils, and then while they're drying down, you go combine barley.
Yeah.
And then once the barley's done, then you go combine lentils, and then you got a flush crop, so then you can go combine durum. Right? So it's those things, kind of working on those little details that, so that you don't end up, yeah, sure, I seeded everything in the spring, but, well, I've got this ripe at the same time as that commodity. Well, which one do I do first? And then, well, if I do that one first, well, then I've got to take and completely clean all the combine out. So, and the grain cart and the trucks and the augers, so I don't get contamination in the next commodity, so that you can save some seed for next year or whatever, right? So I just try to, I'll never, I swear to the day that I retire, I don't think I'll ever try to quit learning.
Yeah, I can see that approach too. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what makes it exciting. So, if you're curious and don't stop learning, I feel you'll never be bored.
Yeah, right? Exactly. To me, I think probably, doing the same thing over and over. I couldn't work in a factory.
No.
Like I couldn't work at General Motors and bolt wheels on a car. I would have to start a gun after doing that. I just couldn't. I'm not built that way. By the time that one season ends in ag, I'm sick of it and I'm ready to move on to the next season, right? And then probably my most favorite season is once the combine's cleaned up and put away and all the equipment's, ready to go in the shed, and then planting season starts, and that's probably my favorite one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, and planting season now it's a little bit full for me because now I'm doing lots of work with Sask Pulse Growers and Farm and Food Care Saskatchewan, and so I'm kind of filling my bucket that way now, and so I got a little less time for planting season, but my work off farm, for commissions, that introduces me to a whole nother group of individuals.
Oh yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and so now I've got all these new peers that I'm inspired by, and every time somebody gets voted onto a board that I'm sitting on, it's like, well, here's a new person. You get to meet them, and it's fun to meet somebody new, and then you get to learn about their operation, and you're inspired by them, and then next thing you know, here's another note in the phone, and some more exploration and hours of YouTube research, and and so it's kind of fun like that. So
well, and it's people in leadership positions, innovators. They want to be leaders. They want to make a difference, right? That's why you're surrounding yourself with, I think, the right kind of people.
I've never once thought about, I want to be a leader. No, I ended up, where I am because I wanted to make a difference.
I don't think you get to choose to be a leader.
Yeah, fair.
Like I
You know,
think you do
and
these things, and then
yeah,
it's. I think the people who have the initiative to put their name forward,
yeah,
whether they want to be, I don't think you get to choose to be one. I think you have to.
yeah. Certainly, you don't do it for fame and glory.
No.
I mean, I'm not making this up. Have literally got death threats.
Perfect.
So,
Are you a grain market analyst?
yeah. Oh, you have too.
I haven't got any death threats yet.
No, you know, some people don't like your decisions, and you know, you get, you know, the two thumbs of fury people going on their smartphones, and
Yeah.
I think they sometimes, you know, see, you're not always going to make everybody happy, but you know, I got into, you know, the work that I'm doing off farm because I wanted to make a difference. I had some production challenges, and naively, it's like, don't these people at SAS Pulse know anything about how to, like, we're swamped in koch out here.
Yeah.
Something's got to be done. And so, you know, yeah, I'm going to run for SAS Pulse Growers. And I managed to get elected. And then I get there and found out, oh, yeah, we've been talking about this for 10 years now. And yeah, if there had been an easy solution, it would have been bought and paid for by now.
That's for people who have never been in these situations, whether it's a town council or or a government rule or a commission rule. Unless you've been there, you don't really understand.
Yeah.
These situations, they have more information than you do sitting in on your couch scrolling through social media, right?
Yeah.
And the decisions are made for a lot of reasons that go into those decisions that you don't quite understand.
Yeah.
Will likely never know.
Yeah, they've got way more information than you probably do, you know, and not to diminish anybody's feelings, right? You know, there was a time that I wasn't on boards and I had feelings too.
Yeah, we've all gone through that stage, I think, of being super irrationally critical, I think is.
Yeah, I think that's a fair description of it. And, you know, and I said on X a couple of 3 years ago, like, somebody's got to do more than bitch. Like, somebody's got to do something. People have to step up and actually make a difference. And, you know, if somebody's angry about what's going on at, you know, a commission somewhere, well, yeah, you know what? Get the forms, fill them out, get one of your neighbors to sign it, witness it, send it in, stand for election, come make a difference.
Yeah.
Right? You know, and you constantly hear from everyone that will complain, oh, I'm too busy for that. Oh, okay, sure.
What I've found, I've had some great influence in my life. They were super busy, but they always could figure out how to do something else.
Yeah.
And everybody's busy, right?
Everyone's busy.
We all think we're busy.
Yeah.
We all are busy to a certain degree, to our comfort level. But I find there's that saying, if you want to get something done, find someone too busy to do it.
Yeah. Right?
And I get some good examples back home there. You know, like, they're doing this now. I thought there's other three roles that they play every day, right?
Yeah.
To a large extent, but now they're doing this, right? It's
amazing. Yeah. You know, it's funny. Me personally, like, I end up being hyper organized. Like, I know that, okay, I've got, you know, these tasks coming up that have to get done, but I also know that I've got, you know, a couple of meetings, you know, so I have to make time to get all my tasks done so that I can attend the meetings and then get my tasks done. You know, you just make it all work. And, you know, I run my farm myself. I'm the only full-time employee. You know, I can't get help from my dad anymore because, I mean, he just went through cancer treatment, right? So he doesn't really help anymore. My son's in university. So, you know, before university classes start, he does help in August, but then September he goes to school, right? You know, I do hire a part-time guy to run grain cart for us. But, you know, we make it work. And I think in certain instances, I think larger farms, it would be easier for them to find time to get away, to go do board work,
Oh, yes.
because they've got someone else that they can, well, hey, while I'm doing this, you do that, right? So your job as a manager is to keep your guys busy, or keep your people busy, right? So whereas for me, and this isn't complaining, this is just the facts. I mean, it's when I walk away from the farm, like today I was in Regina for a meeting, nothing got done at my farm, right? And it's just, so I had to be prepared for me to be away for this day, right? So, work either got put off or it got done before the meeting. That's just the reality of it. It's about time allocation. We all get 24 hours a day, and some of us spend more time on the couch than others.
Right.
And, it's just got to be however you want to take and fill your cup. And some people want to spend time with their family, and then after the kids put to bed, get on X and complain, and I'm just not wired that way. I have roles at the RM and SAS Pulse, Farm and Food Care, and they all, in different ways, fill my cup. And, a lot of people say, oh, there's no way I'd be an RM counselor. And I'm like, I don't mind it. Yeah, I get the odd phone call from a guy saying, hey, I got a road that's garbage. Why is this road garbage? But I also find out, that over time that, hey, if I'm proactive and I phone up ratepayers and say, hey, have you got any roads that are needing work? Because next time the guys are in the area, I'll make sure that they go tune something up. Well, you keep doing that for a couple of years, and guess what? You don't get the angry phone call.
Right.
When you do absolutely nothing, put no effort into the role,
Yeah.
you're going to get ratepayers mad at you,
Yeah.
right? And so, it's the nature of life, really, and dealing with people. And so if you're proactive about stuff, it's less of a, when I was talking about farm management, avoiding the I gotta go moment, right? Well, it's life in general, right?
Yeah.
If you try to avoid those I gotta go moments, then life generally becomes easier. And that's not to say that my life is perfect and stress-free and, my farm is wonderful and rosy and all the things. No, I got challenges too, right?
But you're aware that's you want to avoid those moments.
Yeah.
A lot of times we can fall on that. I gotta go, and it's just, well, I had a business prior to that. It was just one shit show after another.
Yeah.
We're just putting out fires all day long.
Right? Yeah, and that becomes exhausting.
Yeah, it burnt me out. Yeah.
Yeah, right? And that's, yeah. And like, I don't want anyone to think that I believe that I'm perfect or better than them or anything like that. And, and I have, it's my choice to do what I do and to go to the meetings that I attend and be where I go. And, I went on a mission for SAS Pulse Growers in November last year, and I left the country to go do work. And I had one bin of barley that I never turned before I left, and it was on my to-do list. But then I came back from the mission work, and, I never picked up that to-do list.
Yeah.
And so I never turned that barley bin. And then I went to haul it out in January, and guess what? It had spoiled.
Yeah.
Right? So, it can be a distraction, and I still do make mistakes. But it's, again, you learn from the mistakes, and I'll try to never put myself in a situation where I have a barley bin spoiled because I was out of the country. I'm going to make sure that,
Well, you learn from it, right?
yeah, I'm going to turn that bin before I go, or for sure I'm going to get back and I'm going to turn that bin.
Yeah.
I'm not going to forget about it for 2 months like I did, right? And, it was just the perfect confluence of events where, I had overfilled the bin at harvest and it was up on the roof a little bit. And then, I never got it turned in October because I was out with my new little mini ripper and I was, doing trials and stuff like that. And then November comes and it's like, oh, I got to turn all these bins, and I never got that bin done that day. And, but it's like now I got to put a process in place so that I don't forget that, like it's got to be on my calendar where a notice pops up, not a to-do list on a note on your phone.
think you and I are somewhat similar in that we're very curious individuals.
Yeah.
And the curiosity can distract
Yeah,
can distract me anyways from what's important.
Yeah.
And I got a whole list of examples of that in my life. But
Yeah, right. I think, yeah, curious people have those, right?
yeah.
I know for me, like there was no way that I was going to miss this mission work.
Yeah, yeah.
Like it was something that, it's one of the things that, I want to be involved with on SAS Pulse Growers is, new genetics is important. And this was an opportunity to go to another country and meet with plant breeders, right? So, I wanted to participate in that on my own. And, and I felt like I was adding value to the industry by being on that. And then, yeah, guess what? It cost me the difference between malt and feed on a bin, right?
Yeah.
Plus some spoiled barley I actually had to throw out.
So there's a monetary, or you can quantify the losses, but
Yeah.
the qualitative benefits, I guess, you can't. There's some intangibles there that you can't.
Absolutely,
That'll actually make that money back in the future for you.
likely. I mean, right now I don't know how I'm going to make that money back, but yeah, everything comes around, right? And there's nuggets of information that I learned on that trip and people that I met, that it's going to make that worthwhile in the end, and it's worth more than a few $1,000s.
Yeah, well, it's just money.
Yeah, right. So, I'm gonna talk about that experience that I had. The last time that I talk about that experience, I will have long ago forgot about that spoiled barley bin.
Yeah, it was worth the price of spoiled barley.
Right? Yeah. So, like that's, to me, that was an important thing that I felt like I could use my skills and abilities at that point in time to try and get better genetics here.
Yeah.
And that's how we're going to get away from issues with root rot and who knows what other issues that come down the road. But I think we need a consistent stream of genetics, right? So I wanted to participate in that.
I wouldn't have any regrets about it.
Yeah,
It's just one of those things.
it is, right? It's one of those speed bumps in the road, and it's, again, something to learn from and try to never let it happen again. I've heard it said, like, mistakes, like if you have something happen the first time, it's not necessarily a mistake. It happens the second time and you didn't learn from the first time. That's the mistake, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think things happen to us, or sorry, they happen for us, not to us.
Yeah.
So it's probably going to help your planning and your prioritizing next year. Right?
yeah, right?
Which you can't notice the benefit of that, but you're likely not to repeat it twice.
Exactly. So, like you said, it might pay for itself many times over.
Yeah.
So, you put a process in place that, prevents that. And yeah, you know what?
It might have been this barley could have been a canola next year or something.
Right. Exactly.
So which would you rather have?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So,
That's why I look at life. Things happen for us.
yeah. Yeah.
But I think we should,
You probably wrap it up.
we probably can, and I think we should, there's more to talk about in another episode.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Episode 2.
But I think maybe we should go for a wobbly pop.
Yeah, maybe. That sounds good.
Well, thanks a lot. I really enjoyed this.
This was a great conversation. Thanks for doing this. Like this, I'm enjoying. I've only watched a couple episodes so far, but I'm really enjoying it. I think it's fantastic. Yeah.
Well, I'm really good at guest selection, put it that way. So
Well, we'll see how this one's received.
nobody's going to tune in to hear me talk. I know that much. So I've been really, really, really fortunate. So
Yeah.
this is a great one. There's a lot of nuggets of information here for a lot of people. So,
Oh, well, thank you.
yeah,
Thanks, Trent.
great.
It's been great.
All right. Well, thank you. And maybe just take a look at the camera here, and then we'll get a pit. Yeah, I'll just do that. Some point here, I'll need a picture here. So
Yeah, need
there we go. Okay.
a thumbnail.